Princess Lyra stood perfectly still in the grand hall of the intergalactic peace station. Her silver robes draped around her, like water frozen in time. She had been trained since birth to maintain this pose, this perfect stillness that showed the superiority of the Valorian people. Around her, dozens of alien species mingled and talked, but none approached her. That was how it should be. The Valorians were the oldest, the most advanced, the most pure. Other species kept their distance out of respect, or perhaps fear. The reception hall sparkled with lights from 1,000 worlds. Delegates from across the galaxy had gathered here to discuss new trade agreements and territorial boundaries. Lyra's father, the Emperor, had sent her as the Valorian representative. It was meant to be an honor, but Lyra felt nothing. She had been taught that feelings were weaknesses, distractions from duty. A delegation from the Krivix Empire approached her. Their ambassador, a tall being with too many arms, bowed deeply. Lyra acknowledged him with the smallest nod possible. That was the Valorian way. Show nothing, give nothing, remain above all others. But then the Krivix ambassador moved closer. Too close. He began speaking about a proposed union between their houses. A political marriage that would benefit both empires. Lyra's stomach turned cold. This was not part of the agreed discussions. Her guards were stationed at the main entrance, too far to signal without causing a scene. The ambassador's smile grew wider as he described the benefits of such an arrangement. Lyra did what she had never done before. She turned and walked away without permission, without protocol, without the proper formal dismissal. Behind her, she heard gasps from the other delegates. A Valorian princess did not simply leave a conversation, but panic had gripped her chest, and all her training vanished like smoke. She moved quickly through the crowd, her silver robes trailing behind her. She took a turn into a side corridor. Then, another. The station was massive, a city floating in space, and she had only studied the diplomatic sections. These corridors were different, narrower, dimmer. The walls were marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Footsteps echoed behind her. The Krivix ambassador was following, calling her name. Lyra's heart pounded. She saw a door slightly open ahead and slipped through it, closing it softly behind her. She stood in darkness for a moment, breathing hard. Slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim light. This was not a meditation chamber like she had hoped. It was someone's personal quarters, and it was unlike anything she had ever seen. The room was small and crowded with objects. Books were stacked on every surface, some lying open with pages folded. Strange images were pinned to the walls, photographs of alien landscapes and unfamiliar faces. In one corner, a wooden instrument with strings leaned against the wall. Papers covered a small desk, some with technical drawings, others with sketches of machines and plants. Half-built devices lay scattered on a workbench, tools still beside them as if someone had been interrupted mid-task. Lyra stared at the chaos. In Valorian homes, everything had its place. Rooms were clean, empty, perfect. Personal items were kept to a minimum. This room looked like a storm had passed through it. Yet somehow it didn't feel dirty or wrong. It felt lived in, used, real. She moved closer to the desk, careful not to touch anything. The photographs on the wall showed a young person with dark hair, smiling at the camera. In one picture, they stood with an older couple in front of a house. In another, they posed with a younger girl in graduation robes. These must be family members. Valorians did not display such things. Family was duty, not sentiment. A book lay open on the desk. Lyra leaned down to read the handwriting on its pages. It was a journal, filled with personal thoughts written in Earth Standard language. She could read it, as all diplomats learned the major languages. The words spoke of missing home, of hoping to see family again, of small failures at work, and determination to try again tomorrow. Lyra straightened up quickly, feeling like she had touched something sacred. The door slid open behind her. Lyra spun around, her heart jumping. A young human stood in the doorway, wearing a simple work uniform stained with grease and oil. He had dark hair that stuck up in odd directions and tired eyes that went wide when he saw her. "Oh," the human said, stopping short. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was here. Are you lost?" Lyra realized she was still wearing the simple hooded cloak she had grabbed during her escape. Her royal robes were hidden beneath it. The human didn't recognize her. He thought she was just another station worker who had wandered into the wrong room. She should identify herself. She should summon her guards. She should leave immediately. Yes, Lyra said quietly. "I got turned around in the corridors." The human smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Yeah. This station is crazy big. I still get lost sometimes. And I've been here 6 months. I'm Tejo, by the way. I work in engineering, propulsion systems mostly." He stepped into the room and started clearing books off a chair. "Here, sit down for a minute. You look shaken up. Can I get you something? Water? Tea? I have this earth tea that's supposed to be calming. Though, honestly, I just like the taste." Lyra stood frozen. A Valorian of her rank did not sit in cramped personal quarters, did not accept beverages from strangers, did not engage in casual conversation with beings of lesser species. But Tejo was already moving around the small kitchen area, heating water and pulling out cups, talking in an easy, comfortable way about his day and how the station's artificial gravity had glitched in Sector 7. "I'm Lyra," she said, surprising herself. "Nice to meet you, Lyra." Tejo handed her a steaming cup. The ceramic was warm in her hands. She had never held something handmade before. Everything in her life had been manufactured to perfection. This cup was slightly uneven, with a small chip on the rim. She sat down in the offered chair, still not understanding why she was doing this. Tejo sat across from her, on the edge of his bed, the only other seat in the room. He took a long drink of his tea and sighed. "Long day?" Lyra asked, the question coming out before she could stop it. 16-hour shift, Tejo said, rubbing his eyes. "We're upgrading the main engines. And of course, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. But that's engineering, right? You fail, you learn, you try again." He laughed. "What about you? What brings you to this part of the station?" Lyra looked down at her tea. Steam rose from it in lazy spirals. "I was running away," she said honestly. Tejo nodded like this made perfect sense. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes you just need to escape for a bit. Find a quiet place to breathe." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, Lyra could hear the distant hum of the station's systems, the sound of life continuing. In this small, cluttered room, for the first time in her life, Princess Lyra felt like she could breathe. Lyra sat in the small chair, holding the warm cup between her hands. She should leave. Her guards would be searching for her by now. The diplomatic reception would be in chaos. But she couldn't make herself stand up. Something about this cramped, messy room felt safe in a way her palace chambers never had. Tejo finished his tea and set the cup down on a stack of technical manuals. He didn't seem bothered by the clutter around him. In fact, he moved through it naturally, like each object had meaning and purpose, even in the disorder. "So what do you do on the station?" Tejo asked, genuinely curious. Lyra hesitated. "I'm part of a diplomatic delegation," she said carefully. It wasn't a lie, just not the complete truth. "Ah, that explains the formal way you talk," Tejo said with a grin. "Must be stressful. All that political stuff. I'm glad I just work with machines. They don't play mind games." He stood up and walked to the wall where the photographs were pinned. "See this? This is my family back on Earth. That's my mom and dad at their farm. They grow rice and vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it's honest work." Lyra stood and moved closer, studying the image. The two older humans stood in front of a simple house, surrounded by green fields. They were smiling, their arms around each other. "You display images of your family?" she asked. Of course, Tejo said, surprised by the question. Don't you? I mean, I know I won't see them for another 2 years when my contract ends, but having their pictures here helps. Makes the room feel less empty. He pointed to another photo. End quote. That's my younger sister, Hannah. This was taken at her graduation last year. I watched it on video call, but it wasn't the same as being there. I felt terrible missing it. No, you feel terrible for missing a ceremony? Lyra asked, trying to understand. Well, yeah. It was important to her. I wanted to be there to support her. Tejo looked at Lyra with concern. You don't miss your family when you're away? Lyra thought about her father, the Emperor. She thought about her mother, who had died when Lyra was young. She thought about her 2 older brothers, who she saw maybe once a year at formal events. Valorians believe that attachment is a weakness, she said slowly. We are taught to focus on duty, not emotion. Tejo made a face like he had tasted something sour. That sounds lonely. Lyra had never thought of it that way. Loneliness implied wanting something you didn't have. She had been taught to want nothing except to fulfill her role. Tejo picked up the wooden instrument from the corner. This is a guitar, he explained. It's from Earth. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm learning. He sat back down and strummed a few notes. The sound was soft and pleasant, filling the small room. Music helps me relax. Different cultures on Earth have different styles. This song is from Korea, where my ancestors came from. He played a simple melody. It wasn't perfect. His fingers stumbled on some of the notes, and he had to start over twice. But he laughed at his mistakes and kept trying. Lyra watched in amazement. A Valorian who performed poorly would stop immediately, ashamed of the imperfection. But Tejo seemed to enjoy the process even when he failed. Why do you continue if you're not good at it? Lyra asked. Tejo shrugged. Because I enjoy it. And because the only way to get better is to keep trying. My grandfather used to say, every master was once a disaster. We all start somewhere. He set the guitar down and picked up the journal from his desk. Lyra tensed, remembering the personal words she had read. But Tejo just held it gently, running his thumb over the worn cover. I write in this every day, he said. My thoughts, my feelings, what went right, what went wrong. Sometimes I write about missing home. Sometimes I write about cool engineering problems I solved. Sometimes I just complain about the station's terrible coffee. He smiled. It helps me process things. Helps me remember where I've been so I can figure out where I'm going. You record your failures? Lyra asked, shocked. Sure, how else would I learn from them? Tejo opened the journal to a random page. See, here, I wrote about a massive mistake I made 3 months ago. I miscalculated a fuel mixture and nearly caused an engine shutdown. I felt awful, but I wrote down what I did wrong, why it happened, and how to prevent it next time. Now I'm a better engineer because of that mistake. Lyra sank back into the chair. This was completely opposite to everything she had been taught. Valorians hid their failures. They were erased from records, never spoken of. The idea of studying them, learning from them, celebrating them as part of growth was revolutionary. We write to remember. Tejo continued, closing the journal. And to remind ourselves, we can be better tomorrow. A soft chime sounded from the door. Tejo frowned and walked over to check the display panel. His eyes went wide. Lyra? There are security guards outside asking if I've seen someone. They're showing me a picture and... He turned to look at her. Really look at her. For the first time, his gaze moved from her face to the expensive fabric of her robes, barely visible beneath the cloak. Lyra stood slowly and removed the hood. Her silver hair fell down her back, marked with the royal braids of the Valorian imperial family. Tejo's face went pale. You're Princess Lyra, he whispered. Yes, Lyra said quietly. Taeho looked around his messy room in horror. I offered the Valorian princess tea in a chipped cup. I played bad guitar for you. I talked about my family like you were just a normal person. He ran his hands through his hair, making it stick up even more. I am so sorry, Your Highness. I didn't know. I should have recognized you. I should have. Please don't, Lyra interrupted. She stepped toward him, and Taeho automatically stepped back, bowing low. Don't apologize. This was the first real conversation I've had in my entire life. I, Taeho straightened up, confused. Everyone I meet knows who I am. They treat me like a symbol, not a person. They watch every word, every gesture. But you talk to me like I was just another being. You shared your life with me. You showed me your mistakes and your hopes. Lyra felt something strange happening to her face. The corners of her mouth were turning up. She was smiling. Thank you for that. Lyra. The door chimed again, more insistent this time. Voices called from outside. Lyra's guards had found her. I have to go, Lyra said. She moved toward the door, then paused. Taeho? The things you showed me tonight? The photographs and the journal and the music? These things are normal for humans? Pretty normal, yeah, Taeho said, still looking shocked. Why? Because I want to understand more, Lyra said. I want to know why humans do these things. Why they keep memories. Why they accept failure. Why they connect to each other across vast distances. The door opened, and her guards rushed in. They surrounded Lyra immediately, their weapons drawn and pointed at Taeho. He raised his hands in surrender, his face terrified. Stand down, Lyra commanded. Her voice held the royal authority she had been trained to use. This human has done nothing wrong. He assisted me when I was lost. You will not harm him. The guards lowered their weapons reluctantly. As they escorted her out, Lyra looked back once. Taeho stood in his doorway, surrounded by his cluttered, chaotic, beautiful life. He gave her a small wave, uncertain but kind. As she walked back through the corridors toward the diplomatic section, Lyra's mind raced. She had spent 2 hours in that room, 2 hours that had shaken everything she believed about the universe and her place in it. 3 days passed like a slow dream. Lyra performed her duties perfectly. She attended meetings, signed documents, gave speeches written by her advisors, but inside, her mind kept returning to that small room filled with photographs and books, and mistakes turned into lessons. She found herself watching the human delegation during council sessions. They were different from other species. They laughed easily, even in serious meetings. They disagreed with each other publicly but without anger. When one of them made an error in a presentation, the others didn't shame them. They just helped fix it and moved on. On the 4th night, Lyra made a decision that would have horrified her advisors. She waited until the station's night cycle began, then slipped out of her quarters wearing simple clothes she had borrowed from a Valorian servant. She had memorized the route to Taeho's room, counting every turn, every corridor marker. She stood outside his door for a full minute before pressing the chime. What if he refused to see her? What if he reported her presence to the authorities? What if... The door opened. Taeho stood there in casual clothes, looking surprised but not angry. Princess Lyra, he said, then caught himself. Sorry. Should I bow? I'm not sure about the protocol for when royalty shows up at your door at midnight. Just Lyra is fine, she said. May I come in? Taeho stepped aside. The room looked the same as before, perhaps with a few more books added to the piles. He cleared off the chair again and offered her tea again. This time, Lyra noticed he gave her the cup without the chip, keeping the damaged one for himself. I have questions, Lyra said, once they were settled. About humans. About why you do the things you do. I'm squote. I'm squirreled. I'm squirreled. Taeho smiled. I'll answer what I can. What do you want to know? Taeho. Te-ho, 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 everything, Lyra said. The word burst out of her with unexpected force. I want to know why you create art when it serves no survival purpose. Why you maintain relationships across distances that make them almost impossible. Why you hope for things you cannot guarantee. Why you choose imperfection over isolation. Te-ho laughed, not mockingly but with genuine delight. Those are big questions. Maybe I should introduce you to some other humans? They might explain it better than me. Te-ho. Te-ho laughed. Te-ho. 2 hours later, Lyra found herself in the station's greenhouse sector. It was a vast space filled with plants from dozens of worlds. But one section was dedicated entirely to Earth flora. A young man worked there among the flowers, carefully trimming leaves and checking soil moisture. Ji-woo, this is Lyra, Te-ho said. Lyra, this is Ji-woo. He's our resident plant expert. Ji-woo looked up and smiled. His hands were dirty with soil, and he didn't bother to clean them before waving hello. Ji-woo grows plants from Earth, Te-ho explained. Show her the roses. Ji-woo led them to a section where red flowers bloomed in careful rows. Roses, he said proudly. They're difficult to grow in artificial environments. They need specific light, specific nutrients, specific care. It takes months of work, and sometimes they die anyway. Why grow them if they're so difficult? Lyra asked. Ji-woo looked at her like she had asked why water was wet. Because they're beautiful. Because when I see them, I remember my grandmother's garden back in Busan. Because beauty doesn't need a reason beyond being beautiful. He picked one rose carefully and handed it to Lyra. She held it gently, studying the delicate petals. In her world, beauty was manufactured. Perfect. Identical. This flower was unique, with small imperfections in its petals, a natural asymmetry that somehow made it more lovely. I could make perfect plastic roses, Ji-woo said, reading her thoughts. They'd never die, never need care. But they wouldn't be real. They wouldn't have grown from a seed, wouldn't have struggled through challenges, wouldn't smell like summer mornings. The imperfection is what makes it valuable. From the greenhouse, they went to the medical bay. Subin, a human doctor, was finishing her shift. She looked exhausted, but smiled when Te-ho introduced them. Lyra was asking about why humans do things that seem illogical. Te-ho explained. Subin laughed tiredly. Like working double shifts to help refugees from species that most humans have never even heard of? She poured herself coffee from a machine that looked like it might break at any moment. I volunteer in the refugee sector 3 times a week. Most of the beings I treat are from planets that have no relationship with Earth. Some are from species that were at war with humanity 20 years ago. Why help them? Lyra asked. Because they're in pain, Subin said simply. Pain doesn't have a nationality. Suffering doesn't care about politics. I became a doctor to help people, and people means everyone, not just humans. She showed Lyra a wall in her office, covered with drawings. These are from the children I've treated. Different species, different worlds, but they all drew pictures to say thank you. She pointed to a crude drawing of a stick figure with a medical symbol. The colors were bright and clashing, the proportions all wrong. It was objectively terrible art, but Subin looked at it like it was the most precious thing in the world. A Zenthari child drew this, Subin explained. Her species and humans fought a bloody war from 147 to 151. Her parents were refugees from that conflict. She was sick. I helped her get better. And she drew this for me. It reminds me why I do this work. Later that night, Te-ho took Lyra to an observation deck she hadn't known existed. It wasn't an official diplomatic area. It was a small room with a large window overlooking the stars, filled with off-duty station workers from various shifts. Human crew members sat together on mismatched furniture, sharing food from different Earth cultures. An older engineer named Dong-ho was teaching younger staff how to repair a communications relay, patiently explaining each step even when they made mistakes. When one young worker accidentally broke a component, Dong Ho didn't get angry. He just laughed and said, "Good. Now you know what not to do. Let's try again." Someone started playing music from a portable speaker. A few people began to sing along, their voices blending despite being slightly off-key. Others talked about their families back home, sharing stories and photos on their datapads. A woman showed pictures of her daughter's first steps. A man talked about his husband's new job. They celebrated each other's joys and comforted each other's sorrows. Lyra watched it all in amazement. These humans had no genetic relation to each other. They came from different continents, different cultures, different backgrounds. Yet here they were, bonding through shared experiences, creating a new family among the stars. "See that guy?" Taeho pointed to Dong Ho. "He's been in space for 15 years. He could have retired to Earth by now. Live comfortably. But he stays because he says teaching the next generation is more important than personal comfort. He mentors everyone, shares everything he knows, builds people up, instead of keeping knowledge to himself." "In my culture," Lyra said quietly, "knowledge is power. You don't share it freely. You use it to maintain your position above others." "That sounds exhausting," Taeho said. "Always competing, always guarding secrets, always alone at the top. Humans figured out a long time ago that we're stronger together. We share knowledge because when one of us gets smarter, all of us benefit. We help each other because today, you might be the one who needs help, but tomorrow, you might be the one giving it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the humans interact. Someone told a joke, and everyone laughed. Someone else admitted to making a mistake at work, and instead of shame, they received advice and encouragement. Someone burned the food they were cooking, and 3 people jumped up to help fix it, turning the disaster into an adventure. "We fail a lot," Taeho said. "We make mistakes constantly. We're messy and emotional and imperfect. But we try. We learn. We grow. And we do it together." Lyra felt something breaking inside her chest. Not breaking painfully, but breaking open, like a shell cracking to reveal new life beneath. Everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about strength and superiority, and the Valorian way, suddenly seemed hollow compared to this. These humans, with their clumsy emotions and their imperfect art and their insistence on connection despite the pain it could bring, were more alive than anyone she had ever known. "I need to understand more," Lyra whispered. Taeho smiled and handed her a datapad. "I made you a reading list. Human philosophy, history, literature. Start here. This path you're on, questioning everything you were taught?" Lyra took the datapad and held it like the precious thing it was. "I know," she said. "But I'm beginning to think that easy and right are not the same thing." Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra lived 2 lives. During the day, she was the perfect Valorian princess, attending diplomatic functions with the appropriate coldness and superiority her people expected. But at night, she slipped away to the human sectors, learning everything she could about the species that had turned her world upside down. She read the books Taeho had given her. Human history was brutal and bloody, filled with wars and mistakes, and terrible choices. But running through it all was a thread of hope, of people who kept trying to be better despite failing over and over again. She read about humans who had fought against slavery, who had worked for peace after devastating wars, who had reached for the stars even when it seemed impossible. What struck her most was how humans talked about their darkest moments. They didn't erase them or pretend they never happened. They studied them, learned from them, built memorials to remember them. "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it," one text said. Valorians destroyed all records of their failures. How could they learn from what they refused to remember? She discovered human music, from ancient songs passed down through generations to modern compositions that mixed sounds from 100 cultures. She listened to symphonies that made her chest ache and simple folk songs that made her smile. Music served no survival function, yet humans created it constantly, using it to express feelings they couldn't put into words. She explored human art in the station's small gallery. Paintings and sculptures from Earth, each one different, each one showing the unique vision of its creator. In Valorian art, there was one correct way to depict anything, established centuries ago. Human art was chaos. Everyone seeing the world differently and celebrating those differences. But her late-night visits to the human sectors didn't go unnoticed. On the 15th day, her chief advisor, High Counselor Vareth, confronted her in her quarters. "Princess," he said, his voice cold as space itself, "I have received troubling reports. You have been seen in the lower levels, conversing with humans, eating their food, listening to their primitive music. This behavior is unacceptable." Lyra stood straight, using the royal bearing she had been taught since childhood. "I am conducting cultural research. Knowing our fellow species better serves the Empire." "You are embarrassing us," Vareth snapped. "The humans are newcomers to the galactic stage, barely evolved beyond their planet, and yet you spend time with them as if they were equals." He stepped closer. "The other Valorian delegates have noticed. They question your judgment. They wonder if you are fit to represent our people." Something hot flared in Lyra's chest. Anger. She had never allowed herself to feel anger before. The humans may be new to space, but they understand things we have forgotten. They know how to grow, how to change, how to connect with each other across any distance. "Connection is weakness," Vareth said, reciting the old teaching. "Emotion clouds judgment. We are Valorians. We stand alone, above all others. This is our strength." "Is it?" Lyra challenged. "Or is it just fear? Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of admitting we don't have all the answers. Fear of changing even when change would make us better." Vareth's face turned a darker shade. "You forget yourself, Princess. Your father, the Emperor, sent you here to reinforce our position of superiority. Instead, you have been seduced by the emotional weakness of an inferior species. This ends now. You will cease all contact with the humans immediately. You will return to your proper duties. And you will deliver the Emperor's message at tomorrow's summit exactly as written." He placed a data crystal on her desk. "These are your speaking notes for the territorial negotiations. The Emperor expects you to demand human compliance with our terms. We are claiming the Kepler 442 system, and the humans will accept our superiority in this matter. There is no room for negotiation." 1. After Vareth left, Lyra picked up the crystal. She knew what it would contain. Demands. Threats. Reminders of Valorian power and human inferiority. The same approach her people had used for thousands of years. She thought about the humans she had met. Taeho, with his mistakes written down to learn from. Jiwoo, with his imperfect flowers grown just for beauty. Su Bin, treating children from former enemy species. Dongho teaching instead of hoarding knowledge. They would never bow to threats. They would resist, and the fragile peace would crack. Lyra sat at her desk and opened her personal terminal. She began to write her own speech, not the one her father expected. Her hands trembled as she typed, but she kept going. The next evening, she found herself at Taeho's door again. She needed to talk to someone who would understand. He let her in without question, taking one look at her face and putting on tea immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Lyra told him everything. About the confrontation with Vareth. About the speech she was supposed to give, demanding human submission. About the choice she faced between duty and truth. Taeho listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and went to a small box on his shelf. He opened it carefully and removed a worn wristwatch. "This was my brother Hyun's watch," Taeho said softly. "He died 3 years ago in an accident on a colony ship. Equipment malfunction. He was an engineer like me. He ran his thumb over the cracked glass face. I was angry. For so long. Angry at the universe, at the company that didn't maintain the equipment properly, at myself for not being there. I'm sorry, Lyra said, the words feeling inadequate. Thank you. But here's what I learned from losing him. Taeho held up the watch. Hyun used to say that the only way to honor the past is to build a better future. Not to hold on to pain or anger, but to take the lesson and create something good from it. This watch is broken. Frozen, at the moment it stopped. But I keep it not to stay frozen in that moment, but to remember what he taught me. He sat back down across from Lyra. You can't change what you were taught or how you were raised. That's your past, and it made you who you are. But you can decide who you want to become. You can honor your culture while still growing beyond it. If I give the speech I wrote instead of my father's speech, I'll be seen as a traitor to my people, Lyra said. Maybe, Taeho agreed. Or maybe, you'll be the first one brave enough to say what others are thinking, but are too afraid to voice. Change has to start somewhere. It usually starts with one person willing to stand up, even when it's terrifying. Lyra looked at her hands. Her perfect, princess hands that had never done real work. Never created anything. Never touched soil, or fixed machines, or healed wounds. I'm scared, she admitted. It was the first time she had ever said those words out loud. Good, Taeho said. Being scared means you understand what you're risking. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing, even when you're terrified. They talked late into the night. Taeho told her about his own moments of fear, times he had to make difficult choices. He talked about the first time he stood up to a superior who was wrong, risking his career. He talked about the grief of losing his brother and the choice to keep living rather than drowning in sorrow. Humans have a saying, Taeho said, as the station's night cycle deepened. We fall down 7 times. We stand up 8. It means no matter how many times life knocks you down, you get back up one more time. You keep trying. You keep growing. You keep hoping for better. Even when better seems impossible. Lyra stood to leave. Tomorrow would bring the summit, and with it, her choice. Speak her father's words and maintain her position, or speak her truth and face the consequences. At the door, Taeho touched her arm gently. Whatever you decide tomorrow, Lyra, know this. You've already changed. You've already grown. You're already becoming someone new. That took tremendous courage, and nobody can take that away from you. Lyra walked back to her quarters through the quiet corridors. She passed Valorian guards who stood perfectly still at their posts, showing no emotion, no individual thought. She had stood like that once, proud of her ability to be inhuman in her perfection. Now it just looked lonely. In her room, she pulled out the data crystal with her father's speech and held it for a long moment. Then she set it aside and opened the speech she had written herself. She read through it again, refining words, strengthening arguments, pouring her heart into something she had been taught should be emotionless. Tomorrow, she would step onto that stage. Tomorrow, she would speak. Tomorrow, everything would change. She opened a drawer and pulled out a notebook, simple paper, and a pen she had bought from a human vendor. Following Taeho's example, she began to write, not a formal record, but her thoughts, her fears, her hopes for tomorrow. The act of writing them made them real, made them solid things she could hold on to. The first entry in Princess Lyra's journal began with 5 simple words. Today, I chose to grow. The summit chamber was enormous, built to hold representatives from 30 different species. Tiered seating rose in a circle around the central speaking platform, and every seat was filled. The air hummed with translation devices and the whispers of hundreds of delegates. Lyra sat in the Valorian section, surrounded by her people. They sat in perfect stillness, their faces showing nothing, their silver robes flowing like frozen waterfalls. Across the chamber, she could see the human delegation. They sat more casually, some leaning toward each other to whisper comments, others reviewing notes on datapads. She spotted Ambassador Mira, the lead human diplomat, a woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. The summit began with minor territorial discussions. Species debated boundaries and resources with varying degrees of politeness. Some negotiations went smoothly. Others grew heated. Through it all, Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Her turn to speak was coming. High Counselor Vareth sat beside her. He leaned close and whispered, "Remember, Princess, the Emperor's words. Our strength. Our superiority. Do not shame us." Lyra's hand touched the pocket where she had placed her own speech, the one she had written and rewritten throughout the night. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two paths stretching before her. One was familiar, safe, the path of obedience. The other was unknown, dangerous, and completely terrifying. "The chair recognizes Princess Lyra of the Valorian Empire," the summit moderator announced. "The topic is the territorial claim to the Kepler 442 system." Lyra stood. Her legs felt weak, but her training held. She walked to the central platform with perfect grace, her silver robes trailing behind her. Every eye in the chamber turned to watch. The Valorians expected her to remind the galaxy of their superiority. The humans expected demands and threats. Everyone expected the same old speech they had heard 1,000 times before. Lyra reached the podium and placed her hands on either side of it. She looked out at the assembled delegates, at the Valorians sitting in judgment, at the humans waiting for confrontation. She took a breath. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I stand before you today as the representative of the Valorian Empire, one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. We have existed for millennia. We have watched species rise and fall. We have perfected our technology, our society, our way of life." End quote. She paused. This was the moment. She could still take out her father's speech, still say the expected words. Vareth was nodding slightly, pleased with this traditional opening. "But perfection," Lyra continued, deviating from the script, "is not the same as being alive." A ripple of shock went through the Valorian delegation. Vareth's face went rigid. But Lyra kept speaking, her voice growing stronger. "3 weeks ago, I had an encounter that changed my understanding of the galaxy. I spent time among humans, a species we have dismissed as newcomers, as primitives, as beneath our notice. And in doing so, I learned something that my ancient people have forgotten." She looked directly at the human section. Teho sat in the back row, technically not a delegate but present as technical support. Their eyes met across the chamber. "I learned that strength does not come from isolation. True strength comes from connection, from the courage to be vulnerable, from the willingness to admit mistakes and grow from them. The humans do something we, Valorians, have lost the ability to do. They change. They adapt. They fail. And then they stand up and try again, learning from each fall." The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the translation devices seemed to hum more quietly. "I have read human history," Lyra said. "It is bloody and terrible. They have fought wars that nearly destroyed their world. They have made mistakes that cost millions of lives, but they remember these mistakes. They study them. They teach their children about them so that future generations can do better. They don't erase their failures. They learn from them." Vareth stood abruptly. "Princess Lyra, this is highly irregular. Please return to the approved statement." Lyra ignored him. "We, Valorians, claim superiority because we have eliminated war among ourselves. But we did this not through growth or understanding, but through emotional suppression. We don't fight because we don't feel. We don't fail because we don't try anything new. We have mistaken stagnation for perfection. Princess. Vareth's voice was sharp with warning. I have seen humans create art for no purpose except beauty. Lyra continued, speaking faster now, knowing she might be pulled from the platform at any moment. I have seen them help beings from species they once fought wars against. I have seen them teach each other freely, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it. I have seen them maintain connections across impossible distances simply because those connections matter to them. She turned to face the Valorian delegation directly. And I have realized that in our pursuit of perfection, we have become empty. We are like beautiful statues, polished and flawless, but with no life inside us. We have forgotten how to grow. We have forgotten how to hope. We have forgotten what it means to truly live. Ambassador Mira was watching her with an expression of cautious amazement. Other delegates were murmuring to each other, some shocked, some intrigued. Regarding the Kepler 442 system, Lyra said, returning to the official topic, the traditional Valorian position would be to demand control based on our technological superiority and our ancient claim to expansion rights. But I propose something different. I propose partnership, not Valorian superiority, not human compliance, but genuine cooperation, where both species work together, learn from each other, and share the benefits of the system's resources. The chamber erupted. Half the Valorian delegation was on their feet, shouting protests. The human section was frozen in surprise. Other species began talking excitedly, some supporting the idea, others condemning it. Vareth stormed to the platform. Princess Lyra, you are hereby removed from your position as Valorian representative. You will return to your quarters immediately. The Emperor will hear of this disgrace. Lyra stepped back from the podium. She had said what needed to be said. As guards moved to escort her out, Ambassador Mira stood. The human delegation requests a recess to consider this unexpected proposal, Mira said loudly, her voice cutting through the chaos. We find Princess Lyra's suggestions to be worthy of serious discussion. Several other delegations added their voices in agreement. The moderator, looking flustered, called for a 30-minute recess. As Lyra was led from the chamber, she passed the human section. Taeho was there, and despite the seriousness of the situation, he was smiling. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, a human gesture she had learned meant approval and encouragement. In the corridor outside, Vareth turned on her with cold fury. You have destroyed your position. Your father will disown you. You will be recalled to Valoria in disgrace. All for what? For these emotional creatures who barely know how to leave their own planet? No, Lyra said quietly. For the truth. For the chance to show my people that there's another way to exist. For the possibility that we can become more than perfect statues. The Emperor will never accept this, Vareth said. Perhaps not. Lyra agreed. But I had to try. Because that's what I learned from humans. You try. Even when success is uncertain. Even when you might fail. Even when it terrifies you. You try because the alternative is to stay frozen. Forever. Kramand forever Mandarin. Hours later, after being officially removed from her diplomatic position and ordered to prepare for immediate return to Valoria, Lyra sat alone in her quarters. The luxurious room suddenly felt like a prison. She had lost her title, her position, possibly her family. Everything she had said might change nothing. The Valorians might reject her message entirely, but she didn't regret it. A soft chime at her door. She opened it to find Taeho standing there, looking concerned. I heard they're sending you home, he said. I wanted to say goodbye. And to give you something. He held out a small package wrapped in simple paper. Lyra opened it carefully. Inside was a blank journal, similar to the one Taeho kept, but new and unused. For tomorrow, Taeho said simply. And all the days after. You've started changing, Lyra. Don't stop now. Keep writing. Keep questioning. Keep growing. Even if you have to do it alone in the Valorian Empire, keep being the person you're becoming. Lyra held the journal like it was made of precious metal. I'm afraid, she admitted. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if anything I said will matter. That's the thing about change, Tejo said. You rarely see the impact right away. But you planted seeds today, Lyra. In the minds of everyone who heard you speak, those seeds will grow. Even if you're not there to see it. That's how revolutions start. One person speaking truth, and then another, and another, until suddenly, everything is different. He pulled something else from his pocket. The Valorian crystal she had seen in his room weeks ago. I want you to have this back. You gave it to me to show that purity in isolation was just stagnation, but I think you need it now. To remember this moment. To remember that you had the courage to break from isolation. Lyra took the crystal. It felt different now. Not like a symbol of her old life, but like a reminder of her transformation. Thank you, she said. For everything. For treating me like a person. For showing me a different way to live. For giving me the courage to change. Tejo smiled. You did that yourself, Lyra. I just showed you some books and played terrible guitar. The courage was always yours. After he left, Lyra sat at her desk and opened the journal. She picked up a pen. Another gift Tejo had given her weeks ago. Outside her window, the stars stretched endlessly. The same stars that shone on Earth, on Valoria, on thousands of worlds where beings were trying to live their lives. She began to write. Not a formal record, not a diplomatic report, but her own words, her own thoughts, her own promise to herself. Today, I spoke my truth. She wrote. Today, I chose growth over perfection. Today, I became something my people have forgotten how to be. I became alive. The next morning, as her ship prepared to depart, Lyra received a message. It was from Ambassador Mira. 7 delegations have expressed interest in the partnership model you proposed. The Valorians may have rejected it, but others haven't. Seeds planted. Princess. Keep growing. Lyra stood at the viewport of her ship, watching the station grow smaller as they moved away. She didn't know what awaited her on Valoria. Punishment, certainly. Disgrace, probably. But she also carried something new with her. Hope. The knowledge that change was possible. The journal filled with her first entries, and the promise of many more to come. In his quarters on the station, Tejo placed the Valorian crystal back among his photographs and books and repair projects. It sat there, no longer isolated in sterile perfection, but part of the beautiful chaos of a life fully lived. And across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds, beings who had heard Princess Lyra's speech began to ask themselves questions they had never asked before. What if perfection wasn't the goal? What if growth mattered more than superiority? What if connection was strength, not weakness? The transformation had begun.